The joy and the excitement in this room is palpable, isn't it? As it can be for one of the most amazing life events that you've ever experienced, obtaining a graduate degree. And it's an honor to be here with you today and to share a few stories. If I can have the first slide, please. You thought I was kidding. What I'm trying to do for the audience is create exactly what they've always wondered, is what is it like to sit through a graduate school class for multiple years in a row and see PowerPoint slide after PowerPoint slide. And the truth is, to recreate the true experience, I'd have to have the audience go back home and put on a pair of pajamas or their favorite pair of sweatpants, because that's how many of the graduate students went through education at home. If I can go back to the slide, please, I'd like to share with you three things. One word to inspire you, two words to remember, and I promise to leave you with a phrase that I guarantee will help you engage all those in your future life, no matter what you've chosen as a scientist, as a clinician scientist, or as a physician clinician. Next slide. First, the word to inspire you, and that word I've chosen today is miracle. And I had to look it up. What exactly is a miracle? And Wikipedia gave me several options. First, it said, number one, an event attributed to divine intervention. Divine intervention. Number two, a perceptible interruption in the laws of nature. Now, I have to acknowledge that if we waited for definitions 1 and 2, this audience, this esteemed graduating class of 2011, would barely make it to the reception. So I looked further. A miracle could be considered to be any statistically unlikely but very beneficial event. And I like that because I believe in miracles, and I hope by the time you leave BU, you will believe in miracles also. The next slide, please. However, miracles require others. They can't be done alone by me or anyone else. And so I'd like all the graduates right now to take their right hand and lift it in the air and pull out of the air your favorite memory of your most beloved supporter or supporters and put that hand over your heart. And let it enter your heart for the next 10 seconds of silence. Now that feels good, doesn't it? It feels good to receive the love and support and belief in you that you could make it to this day through thick and thin, and you have. You are successful. You carry inside your heart those who may be in the audience, those who may not be in the audience, who supported you beyond all others. Now I want you to put your hand back on your heart, and I'm going to ask you today to make one promise, and one promise only. And that is, in your future careers, no matter where you go, that you will find someone else to give you the love and support that you have benefited from, that got you to this day, and carry it forward and make someone appreciate and enjoy that kind of support from you. Promise me that you'll do that. I trust you. Next slide, please. What I've brought to you today, and this is a picture, and I'm sorry that some of you have to crook your necks. That's a picture of a gorgeous doctor's bag, and I wish I had one. Instead, I have just this old beaten-up doctor's bag. It's not very special to look at, but it's a remarkable doctor's bag for me. I've owned it for decades. It was given to me. I keep it in a special place in the left upper corner of my closet in my bedroom, no matter where I've lived for the last 3 decades, and it's always there. And in it, I put the things that have happened in my life that remind me of where I've been, because sometimes I need those symbols to help me through the day. And I had a frank conversation with this bag, who had never left the closet, and I said, I think it's time that this bag exit the closet. And the bag was nervous. In front of all these people at commencement, I said, don't worry, I'll be there with you. The first object that I found in the bag from my childhood, about age 7, was this rocket. This rocket comes from a birthday party. One of my friends had a party, and I was lucky enough to be invited. And at this party, one of the main events was to see this rocket repeatedly launched into the air. And all of us boys just cheered every time it went up into the air. And at the end of the party, as we were collecting our goodie bags, the father of the birthday boy came over to me and he put his arm around me and said, "Son," that's how people used to talk many, many years ago. "Son," he said, "there's something different about you. All the other boys wanted to know how high up in the air the rocket went, and you kept asking what makes the rocket work." And to be honest with you, my face turned red and I was incredibly embarrassed. At that point in my life, I didn't want to be different than all the other boys. I just wanted to be the same. And I realized that what Mr. Sadow was telling me is that I had a quirk. I was a little bit different. And I felt terribly uncomfortable with that quirk. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that I want you to accept that if we've gotten this far together in life, we all have quirks. I have quirks. We are a quirky bunch. But it's exactly those quirks that you'll need to be successful in your future life. Embrace those quirks. Make them part of your personality. Be proud of your differences. The next object that I found, again from childhood, was a pacifier and a forceps. And I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and for those of you who don't know where Ohio is, it's somewhere to the left on the map of Boston, located between the two coasts. And in Dayton, Ohio, at around 7 years old, something special had happened, and I noticed that something special had happened because I saw a pink balloon hanging off the mailbox across the street from me, and I said to my mother, "Ma, what's the pink balloon doing on the mailbox?" She goes, "Well, the family across the street has put in an order for a little girl." I said, "Really? What do they do if they want a little boy?" She said, "They put up a blue balloon and the mailman delivers it." I said, "This is fantastic. I want to be a mailman." I don't know what they do, but it sounds good. And I went to sleep one night in a small, modest house in Dayton, Ohio, with 3 bedrooms, and it seemed a night like any night until I was woken up by pounding on the front door. And I went and I peered out the crack of my door, wondering what had woken some of the household members up, especially my father. And on the other side of the door, he opened it, and a woman came in. It was our neighbor bringing her baby. And I knew immediately that something was wrong because the baby was the wrong color. The baby was blue. And I knew that that couldn't be right, and that couldn't be healthy. Later, I would learn that the baby was cyanotic and had the presence of 4 to 6 grams of reduced hemoglobin in the superficial tissues, explaining the cyanosis. My father instinctively picked up the telephone and dialed our family doctor, who was Dr. Maurice Summer, who within a minute or two came over in the middle of the night in a t-shirt and black pants carrying his doctor's bag. And he pulled out his stethoscope and he put it over the baby's chest, and I think he must have heard inspiratory wheezing, which we call stridor. And he recognized that there was upper airway obstruction. And he reached in his bag and he deftly pulled out these forceps. And he reached into the baby's mouth and pulled out the pacifier that was obstructing the airway. And immediately the baby started to cry and pinked up. And I saw something as a 7-year-old boy I'd never seen, a miracle. I knew that the child had almost died and was now saved. And I decided at that minute that I wanted to be a doctor. And I watched what was happening in the room, and to my surprise, all of the grown men, including the doctor, cried when they saw the baby cry. And someone had called 911, and a fireman came through the door and asked what had happened. And as he came through the door and heard the story, he cried too. And the reason I tell you this story is not that my story is important to you, but your story is of vital importance to you. May you remember that story. Why did you go into science? Why did you become a physician scientist? Why did you become a clinician? Why an epidemiologist? These are the very fibers that make you who you are, and you will need to remember that story to celebrate in good times and to provide you with solace in hard times. Sometimes hard times come, and as an intern, I did what I usually do, and I went from room to room admitting my new patients. And in one room, my last patient, there was a woman in her mid-40s who looked quite healthy, and I was surprised that she was actually admitted. Maybe I was a little aggravated. And she said something to me that I'll never forget. The only words that she spoke to me were, "Doctor, please don't let me die. Please don't let me die." And I tried to reassure her that I was there and that everything would be okay. And she suddenly, unexpectedly, collapsed on her bed without saying a word. And I rushed over to her, never having seen a patient die in my midst, and I had no idea what to do. And I tried to reach in my background, in my training, what was there that I could use to help me at this moment? And although it sounds silly, the only thing I could think to say was, "Annie, Annie, are you okay?" Learned from my CPR, but her name wasn't Annie and she wasn't okay. And I did the only thing I thought to do was to pull the cord on the wall to ask for help and call a cardiac arrest. And the lights lit and the alarms went off, and soon I was not alone. And we tried to resuscitate this woman, and no matter what we did, we failed. And when my resident evaluated my performance, she said to me, "You let this patient die. You failed to oxygenate her." And I realized that the pacifier was not going to help me, that I had not been able to accomplish what my physician role model, Dr. Summer, had been able to accomplish by saving a life. And no matter what I did, the patient died. And that's as close as I came in my career to abandoning medicine for fear that I would never be successful. Though it was a dark day. And I went home and I reached in my doctor bag to see if I could find anything to help me. And what I found to my surprise was this deck of cards that had been given to me by a surgeon. She was a wonderful surgeon, 6'2", broad shoulders, extremely large hands. We called her Dr. Josie. Now, I don't want you to think as students that we were on first-name basis with any surgeon. That would not be true. But she was a wonderful role model and a colorectal surgeon. And one day I found myself rotating with her, and we were in the elevator alone. And I didn't know what to say, so I thought of something. And I said, "Doctor, can you tell me, how do you help your patients with cancer in whom you have to do death-defying surgery and change their life? What can you possibly say to reassure them? How do you go to work every day?" And to my surprise, she answered my question, and she said, "I realize that the patients come to me with a deck of cards, and I'm not responsible for the deck of cards that my patients hold in their hand, but I do everything possible to help them play their cards in the most advantageous way for them." And I realized that I had done the best I possibly could to play that patient's hand of cards. And even though I failed, that I was not responsible for her cards. I tell you this, no matter whether you're a scientist or a clinician or will ever touch a patient, there will be good times and bad. Remember how little we can control some of the events in life, no matter how hard we try. And that allows us to move on to the next patient, to the next experiment, and to the next day. The next thing I found in my bag was a reminder of one of the major mistakes of many that I've made in my professional career. It turns out that I had prescribed lactated ringers to one of my patients. And my resident, Bob, who was very respectful of me, his intern, called me aside after rounds and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." And he took me into a small conference room alone, and out of his pocket, he picked a bag and threw it at me. And I caught it, and I looked at it, and I said, "Why'd you throw the bag at me, Bob?" He said, I wanted you to read the ingredients. I said, excuse me? He said, I want you to read the ingredients of this bag of lactated ringers out loud. And so I did. I started reading the line, and I got to potassium. And he said, that's right. Did you hear what you just said? And I said, yes. This lactated ringers contains potassium. He said, the only problem is that you gave it to a patient with an elevated serum potassium. We call that hyperkalemia. And I said, that was a mistake, wasn't it? And he said, yes. He said, you didn't kill anyone this time, but it seems as if you didn't know what you were doing. And I said, Bob, you're right. I didn't know what I was doing. I never read the bag. From that day on, I changed my behavior, and every time I saw an IV bag, I started to read the ingredients. I would flip it around and make sure that what I had prescribed the patient was actually receiving. And I became fascinated with IV fluids, and it pulled me towards nephrology as a career. I absolutely love acid-base and electrolyte physiology, and it all began, I believe, because Bob threw the bag at me. Why do I tell you this story? Make sure when someone throws something at you that you catch it. It may change your life. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Go ahead, live life on the edge, but try not to make the same mistake more than twice or perhaps 3 times. The next thing in my doctor's bag is an article, circa 1987. It could have been, as Dr. Antman said, 1887, but I like to think of myself as somewhat younger. It doesn't matter what the title of the paper is. To me, it mattered that it was published and that I was the first author. And to all of you who've ever published a paper or ever will, you know what it takes to be successful enough to be an author on a manuscript that's published. There's a joy in it, a sense of discovery that's unlike anything else. And I hope that all of you have the chance to publish. And I was so proud. Like many of you, I put the article under my arm as I went to interview from place to place. And for reasons of love, I found myself moving in the middle of fellowship in nephrology from Chicago to Boston, and I met Dr. John Schwartz. And with my article under my hand, I interviewed with Dr. Schwartz for a research fellowship in nephrology in his laboratory. And I said, Dr. Schwartz, I'm a published author. And he said, let me see that article. And he took it out of my hand, and he read the abstract right in front of me. And he said, oh. And I said, what do you mean, oh? And he said, I see you've done an experiment in dogs where you've put in some fluid and electrolytes into the venous system of the dog and painstakingly collected the urine. And I said, yes, we did, with a smile. And he said, what you've done is a black box. You put something in to the dog and you measured what came out, but you have no idea what happened in between. This experiment is a black box. And I realized that Dr. Schwartz, right in front of me, was insulting my work. And I realized that he was the first person in my professional research life to have the courage to criticize me, to make me a better person. And that began the beginning of a beautiful relationship that has lasted for more than 25 years. And Dr. John Schwartz has never swayed from giving me honest feedback about my personal and professional life and challenged me by asking me questions that I had no way to answer at the moment. And always he's made me look deeper, not only into myself, but into the analysis of my data and into the meaning of life. And I wish all of you in this room had the chance, the luxury of working with Dr. John Schwartz, but you may not. The important part of my telling you this story is that if you find someone in your life who has the courage to criticize you in a loving way that you can hear, hold on to that person. Make them a part of your life. Have them be your colleague and your mentor, because that is a relationship that can last for years of gloriousness for both parties. An email, an unusual email. I've saved only one email in my bag, and the email was exchanged between me and someone else in this room at a very difficult time. It was a moment when one of our house officers named Ari had suddenly died. And he died because he held his breath too long underwater. And for reasons that only God knows, he never survived. And we held a memorial service for him on the Hebert Lounge on the 14th floor of the medical school to commemorate his life. He was a wonderful human being. And at the beginning of that service, a woman strode in from the back of the room, looking very dignified, tall, straight, well-dressed. And I turned to my colleague and I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's our new dean. That's Karen Antman." And I was so impressed that our new dean would come to a funeral service of someone that she didn't know to commiserate with us, that night, rather late, I decided I would email Dr. Antman, and so I did. And as I was about to press the send button, my hand started to shake. And no wonder, I had never emailed a dean before. And what I wanted to tell her was very simple. Thank you for coming to the service. It was really nice for you to show up. I pressed the button somewhat after 10 o'clock, thinking I'd be relatively safe, never having emailed a dean before. I never really expected to hear back from Dean Antman, but 8 minutes later on my Apple computer, I heard that characteristic ding, and I knew that an email had arrived. So I rushed over and was shocked to find that the sender was Dr. Antman. Only 8 minutes after I'd sent the email, she wrote back. And she told me the story of how, at her prior program, a house officer had died, and that if I did nothing else, I must pay attention to the surviving. Pay attention to the surviving, she said to me, to those left behind. And those words had so much meaning for me at that time that I decided I would reach out to Karen, who was the fiancée of Ari. And she was also a house officer in our program. And I met with her several times in the East Newton cafeteria over coffee. And each time we talked about Ari, we cried. And we cried so much that we filled multiple of the cheap white napkins that are in the East Newton cafeteria. And I reminded her and myself that we were crying tears of strength and that it was okay to cry together. And I want to thank you, Dr. Antman, for changing my life. You changed my life for the better because you took the time to email me and to reach out to me at a time when I needed words that would provide guidance. And for the rest of my career, I have always paid attention to those who survive, those who have gone to heaven. And that has been a lesson for me that I've never forgotten, and I want to publicly thank you for that. Now, I promised you 3 words to engage others. Maybe I could go to the next slide. Two guiding words. I want you to take these with you no matter where you go. And the words are very simple, and they were encouraged as a source of discovery by Dr. Linda Hyman, who's here on the stage. And Dr. Hyman said, I want you to find words that can appeal to MDs, PhDs, MD, PhDs alike. I said, how long do I have, Dr. Hyman? She said, about 6 months. Good luck and keep it short. So I looked for 6 straight months for 2 words that would have meaning, and I finally found them. And I think those are the words up there on the screen. That's odd. And it turns out that Isaac Asimov ushered those words. Next slide. Maybe you can go back a slide. And back another slide. No. Isaac Asimov, to my surprise, when I looked up, was a BU professor in the Department of Biochemistry between 1948 and 1958, before he became a famous science fiction writer. And I was so moved by his 2 words, that's odd, that I want everyone in the graduating class to speak out with me now and say, that's odd. Go ahead. That's odd. We can do it louder. That's odd. No matter where you go, those words will be guiding for you. They'll be central words because what those words say, and Asimov was correct, those words are so meaningful because they suggest that you've recognized a pattern, or more specifically, that something is different in your experiment, something is different in your patient's story or in the exam in their laboratories that makes you step back and say, that's odd. May you always be able to utter those words without any hesitation whatsoever. That's odd. I also promised you 3 words to engage others. And those 3 words are very simple. Take a seat. Take a seat. Can you imagine that? 3 words that will guarantee in your life that you will be able to engage others. Take a seat. And I learned these 3 words from a patient. This patient was a 73-year-old man who I went in to see alone. And sometimes the students would send in the attending all by himself or herself and say, good luck. Can you still take care of patients? And those of us attending said, I'm not sure, but we'll try. So I went in to see this 73-year-old man alone. He had some very common diagnoses. One was diabetes mellitus type 2. The second was high blood pressure. The third was elevated lipids, we call hyperlipidemia. He also had coronary artery disease and was status post ventricular fibrillation arrest. And finally, he had mild vascular dementia. And as I went in to see the patient, I said, will he be able to provide me with any meaningful history, having had mild vascular dementia? I didn't know what to expect. When I went into the room, I found a man sitting bolt upright, looking surprisingly elegant. His silver gray hair was slightly messed to one side, and he had bright blue eyes. And he looked so elegant from the end of the room. And as I walked in, I noticed his very broad, square shoulders. He was surprisingly intact from a musculoskeletal point of view, a very strong man. And as I shook his hands, I felt the residual calluses there. And I said to him, were you a laborer? And he said, yes, I was, a carpenter. And I loved every minute of my career. And I said, I bet you did. And I asked him, I said, I could talk to you about many things, sir, but I couldn't help but notice that your status post-ventricular fibrillation arrest. That means, sir, that you've died. You've died and been brought back. And he smiled and he said, yes, I have. And I said, do you mind if I ask you what that was like, dying and being brought back to life? He said, no, take a seat. And so I did, and I realized that that is the most important instrument that a physician or scientist can have, is a chair. Never be afraid to take a seat or to ask those of your colleagues or your patients to take a seat with you. Well, what did I learn as I sat down next to this man? For the next 45 minutes, he took me to his afterlife experience. And I found out that in those 45 minutes, a quality of a story that I had never, ever heard before. And this man convinced me in those 45 minutes that, in fact, there is life after death, because he was able to recall details of the people that he met, the sights and the smells of the afterworld that I would never have seen otherwise. I didn't want to leave the room. I desperately wanted to believe that there's life after death. Is there? I'm not sure. I can't swear to you that I know the answer. But I do know that that man gave me a gift because he was the first person to invite me to sit down and listen to his story with the 3 words that I leave you with: take a seat. Well, there's some special people in the audience, and I don't want to give you the impression that all the information comes from faculty to students. Sometimes it comes the other direction. And there's some people that I'd like to say thank you to who are part of the student body. The first one is Dr. Ed Carrera. And Ed Carrera and I were in a hot, sticky room at the back of the dialysis unit doing rounds when he just finished presenting a very complicated case. And at the end of his presentation, I did what most principal investigators or attendings do. My diaphragm dropped. I went to take a very deep breath, and I went like this. and Ed knew exactly what was happening. I was about to expound on all the information that he'd given me. But in the middle of my breath, he held up his finger. And I said, "Ed, you're giving me the finger." And he smiled. And in that moment, I knew that he knew that I knew that he knew that Ed learns best by taking the first shot at the differential diagnosis. He didn't want to hear it from me. He wanted the chance to practice. So I said to him, "Ed, you like to practice. That's how you learn best." And he said, "Yes." And I had great hopes for Ed, because not only had he figured out how he learns best, but because he has, there's a good chance he can help others learn how they learn best. And I was so impressed with Dr. Ed Carrera, who taught me the value of learning how you students learn best and being respectful of that mechanism. The next person I'd like to acknowledge is Dr. Jonah Rubin. Dr. Jonah Rubin was a student who stuck out in every conference room where I saw him because he incessantly asked questions. He was one of the most curious human beings I'd ever met. And he acknowledged to me privately that it was not always easy for him to learn to read and to acquire information from reading. And I said, "Well, how did you become so knowledgeable?" He said, "By teaching others. That's how I know that I've learned, by teaching others." And the most important thing that Jonah Rubin has taught me is that we all have things that we don't do as well as others. I have strengths and weaknesses. And the goal in my life is to use my strengths to bolster my weaknesses and to meet the challenges of growth. And I encourage you to follow Jonah's lead and find the things in you that you'd like to do better and utilize your strengths to make those things happen. The next person I'd like to acknowledge is Dr. Nisha Verma. Nisha and I went through some very difficult times together when, tragically, her grandparents were killed in a car accident right in the middle of one of her rotations. And she allowed this tragedy to be shared with me in a way that allowed me to see the beauty of her family and how they came together in a way that I had never seen a family come together to support and love and cherish each other at a moment of extreme tragedy. As a result, Nisha was able to heal and to carry on her work. And I learned about the value of healing by watching her family. I know, Nisha, that your grandparents are here in spirit today, and if they could celebrate with you, they would, but that they are from the place where they exist now. And for those of you who have people that you would love to have been here to share this moment, I know that they're with you too. Finally, symbols. I've told you lots of stories today, and you've been very patient with me. This symbol has meaning to me. It's a beaten-up old doctor's bag, not only because it carries my memories, but because it was given to me by Dr. Maury Summer, the same family doctor that was my family doctor for years, on the very day that I graduated. This bag has acquired great meaning to me over the years, even though it may actually have no specific meaning to you. And that's the value of a symbol. So that's why when you entered this auditorium today, this arena, you found a quarter on your seat. That was me. I left that quarter for you, not as the first installment in your loan repayment. It won't go far. But it's a freshly minted quarter from the U.S. Mint, from the Glacier National Park, from Montana. And the most important part about that quarter is it is embossed with the year 2011, the very year of your graduation. It's uncirculated. It's never been touched by human hands. In fact, when I distributed the quarters, I used this gastroenterological blue glove. You're the first people and only person, to my knowledge, to touch that quarter. And today it's worth 25 cents. In 10 years, it will actually be valuable to you, remarkably important in your collection. In 25 years, it will be priceless. In 50 years, when you come together at the Boston University School of Medicine 50th year graduation, no one will be able to buy that quarter out of your hand. I hope you carry it with you always as a reminder of the joy of today, of the sense of accomplishment that you have achieved that may be one of the most remarkable instances in your life. Let me go to the last slide and summarize. 3 things we've talked about today. Miracles. I believe in miracles, and I hope you do too. Keep your eyes open for miracles. I promise they will happen if you have the awareness to observe them and record them. That's odd. We've said those words out loud today. Don't be afraid to recognize patterns that are unusual and different and special. May you be the first to utter those words as often as you can. That's odd. And finally, to engage others, never be afraid to say those 3 words. Take a seat, because they will bring you one of the greatest joys of humanity. That is, being a human being by having the luxury of using your voice to communicate with others who care about you, who are interested in your work, and will help you achieve the greatness that you deserve. To the class of 2011, I say thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for this invitation. I'll be here when you come back home. May you always be your home. May you always look upon us with great affection. I think I speak for everyone in the audience and everyone on the faculty when I say we are so proud of you. We couldn't be more proud. Thank you very much.